It started with a small dispute over property boundaries, the kind of thing you'd expect to resolve with a quick chat over coffee or, at worst, a stern letter. I thought it would end there. It didn't. Karen Davis, my neighbor of 3 years, had other plans. She wasn't the type to let a disagreement fizzle out. She thrived on escalation, and I was about to learn just how far she'd go. The trouble began on a crisp October morning in 2024. I'd been out walking Pixel, my golden retriever, along the creek that runs behind our properties. The creek sits on an easement, legally accessible to both of us, though I'd always been the one to maintain it, clearing debris after storms and planting native grasses to keep the banks stable. Karen, on the other hand, treated it like her personal backdrop, occasionally tossing lawn clippings into the water when she thought no one was watching. I'd let it slide. Neighborly peace seemed worth the small annoyance. That morning, though, I noticed something new. A row of metal fence posts, freshly driven into the ground, slicing across the easement and blocking my path to the creek. They weren't just on the boundary line, they were a good 6 feet onto my property, according to the survey I'd done when I bought the place. The posts were cheap, the kind you'd find at a hardware store clearance sale, but the intent was clear. Karen was claiming land that wasn't hers. I took a deep breath and walked over to her house, hoping to sort it out. Karen answered the door in a bright pink tracksuit, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail. "What do you want?" she asked, skipping any pleasantries. I explained the issue calmly, pointing out the posts and mentioning the survey. I even offered to show her the documents. Her response was a smirk. "That creek's an eyesore and I'm fixing it. You should thank me." I wasn't thanking anyone. Back home, I dug out the survey and emailed a scanned copy to Karen, along with a polite but firm request to remove the posts. No response. 2 days later, I came home to find 3 more posts and a roll of chain-link fencing leaning against her shed. She was doubling down. I called a lawyer friend, Elliot, who advised me to send a formal cease and desist letter before things got uglier. I did, citing the survey and local property laws, and had it delivered by certified mail. Karen signed for it. I saw the receipt, but the post stayed put. Instead, she upped the ante. One evening, I caught her directing a delivery truck to drop off a stack of concrete blocks near the creek. Pixel barked like mad, sensing the intrusion before I did. When I asked what she was doing, she claimed she was building a retaining wall for safety. The creek was barely 2 feet deep. Enough was enough. I contacted the county clerk's office, who confirmed the easement was public record and Karen had no right to block it. Armed with this, I requested a visit from the sheriff's department. Deputy Rogers, a no-nonsense guy with a handlebar mustache, showed up the next day. I walked him to the creek, showed him the survey, and pointed out the posts. He nodded, scribbling notes, then knocked on Karen's door. Karen came out swinging, verbally at least. She insisted the land was hers, claimed the survey was fake, and accused me of harassing her. Rogers, unfazed, asked to see her documentation. She produced a crumpled plat map from the 1980s, which didn't even match the current property lines. He handed it back, told her my survey held up, and advised her to remove the posts or face legal consequences. "Have a pleasant day, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat before driving off. I thought that would settle it. Karen had been called out, the law was on my side, and the posts were still just posts, no fence yet. But as I watched her glare at me from her porch, I realized she wasn't backing down. If anything, she looked more determined than ever. Pixel nudged my hand, whining softly as if he knew trouble was brewing. I gave him a scratch behind the ears and promised myself I'd protect our land, no matter what Karen threw at us next. Little did I know, she was already planning her next move, and it was bigger than a few fence posts. 2 weeks after Deputy Rogers told Karen to remove her illegal fence posts, I came home to a scene that turned my stomach. My wooden fence along the creek was cut in 3 places, jagged splinters hanging like broken bones. Deep tire marks gouged the mud nearby, and one of my beehives, home to thousands of honeybees, was smashed, frames scattered, honey oozing into the grass. Worst of all, Pixel, my golden retriever, limped toward me, whimpering. He'd stepped on a nail board hidden by the fence line, a cruel trap. The vet cleaned the wound, prescribed antibiotics, and warned of infection. Rage replaced my shock. Karen had crossed a line, and I was done playing nice. I ordered 4 motion sensor cameras, the kind that ping your phone every 10 seconds until you mute them, and had them overnighted. Next, I called Nora Beltran, a licensed surveyor with a reputation for precision and grit. She arrived the next day, her truck loaded with gear. By noon, she'd marked my property corners with fluorescent orange stakes and posted laminated placards citing state laws on tampering with survey monuments, $5,000 fines and jail time. "Let's see them mess with this," Nora said, hammering in the last stake. That night at 1:13 a.m., my phone lit up with camera alerts. The live stream showed two figures in hoodies creeping along the creek. One yanked stakes from the ground, tossing them into the water. The other wielded bolt cutters, snipping at my repaired fence. Moonlight caught the taller figure's face. Chandler, a local troublemaker deputy Rogers knew from prior run-ins. The shorter one, with platinum blonde hair peeking from her hood, was Karen. I saved the footage and called Rogers. By dawn, Rogers had a warrant for criminal mischief and trespassing. He and two deputies hit Chandler's place first. Body cam footage later showed Chandler in pajama pants, swearing he'd been asleep all night. Rogers held up a still from my camera, Chandler bolt cutters in hand mid-snarl. Chandler clammed up. At Karen's, Rogers found the stolen stakes in her garage, along with Nora's placards and a can of red spray paint, same shade as the graffiti on my no trespassing signs. Karen claimed Chandler stored tools there without her knowledge, but the evidence was damning. Rogers cuffed them both. Karen made bond by lunch, her smirk intact. Chandler wasn't so lucky. His 2021 Czech kiting conviction meant probation, and this stunt triggered a no-bond hold pending review. As they were hauled to county jail, I felt a grim satisfaction. Pixel's paw was healing, but the beehive was a total loss and the emotional toll lingered. I spent the afternoon reinforcing the fence and checking camera batteries. Knowing Karen's release meant she'd be back to her tricks unless I stayed vigilant. Nora stopped by to restake the property gratis. "You've got a fighter's spirit," she said, handing me a spare placard. I thanked her, but my mind was on the bigger picture. Karen and Chandler's midnight raid wasn't just petty vandalism. It felt coordinated, like part of a larger plan. Elliot, my lawyer, agreed, suggesting we dig into the HOA's role, given Karen's obsession with controlling the neighborhood. I nodded, staring at the creek where the stakes had sunk. This wasn't over, but I had evidence now, and I'd use it to bury them. With Chandler locked up on a no-bond hold and Karen out on bail, the fight was far from over. My lawyer, Elliot, saw a thread to pull: the HOA's role in Karen's schemes. We subpoenaed their financial records, targeting the $3,500 gate Karen had unlawfully installed to block the creek. The records revealed a cashier's check signed by Chandler, drawn from the HOA's reserve account. Digging deeper, we uncovered a bombshell. Chandler, the HOA's bookkeeper, had siphoned $46,900 through checks for grounds improvements that never existed. The gate was just one piece of his fraud. The HOA board, blindsided, held an emergency meeting. Shocked by Chandler's betrayal, they voted unanimously to press charges. Detective Miriam Page from the county's white-collar crime unit took the lead. She seized Chandler's home computer, uncovering a treasure trove of deceit, forged receipts, fake meeting minutes, and a Word template for neon green approval stamps used on sham documents. Worse, some of the stolen funds had been funneled to Karen's personal account, labeled as consulting fees. It was a paper trail of collusion. Karen lawyered up fast, hearing James Hall, a defense attorney, charging $600 an hour. Hall stonewalled, refusing to answer questions or produce documents. Karen's silence spoke volumes, but her smug demeanor faltered when Page linked her to the fraud. Chandler, meanwhile, faced probation revocation for his 2021 check kiting scheme, plus new felony charges for theft and conspiracy. Desperate, he cut a deal with the DA, agreeing to testify against Karen in exchange for a reduced sentence. His cooperation was a game changer. While the legal gears turned, I scored small victories. The HOA, scrambling to restore trust, sent me a letter acknowledging their oversight and promising reforms. They also cut a check for $2,500 from Chandler's frozen assets to cover my damaged beehive and Pixel's vet bills. It didn't erase the stress, but it helped. Pixel's paw healed, and he was back to chasing squirrels, his tail wagging like a metronome. The creek, too, looked better after I cleared the debris from Karen's concrete blocks, which Rogers had removed as evidence. Elliot and I met to review the case. Chandler's testimony will sink Karen, he said, flipping through Page's report. The evidence was overwhelming: camera footage, financial records, and now Chandler's insider account of Karen's plan to annex my land for her own use, with the HOA's funds as her piggy bank. I felt a flicker of relief, but caution lingered. Karen's attorney was a shark, and she'd fight dirty to avoid prison. One evening, as I walked Pixel along the now secure creek, I noticed the first blooms on the native grasses I'd planted. They were small, stubborn signs of life amidst the chaos. Nora Beltran, the surveyor, texted me a thumbs-up emoji, saying she'd heard about Chandler's plea. "You're winning," she wrote. I wasn't so sure. Winning felt distant when Karen was still free, plotting her next move. But the evidence was stacking up, and the HOA's awakening gave me allies. I scratched Pixel's ears and stared at the creek, its water catching the sunset's glow. Karen had underestimated me, and now she'd face the consequences. For the first time in months, I allowed myself a small smile, knowing the law was closing in. After months of legal wrangling, the courtroom became the stage for Karen and Chandler's reckoning. Chandler, facing a probation violation from his 2021 check kiting scheme, pled guilty, triggering an automatic 18-month prison sentence. New felony charges for theft, conspiracy, and criminal mischief loomed, but the DA offered a deal: testify truthfully against Karen for a 4-year sentence with parole eligibility in 2. Chandler, cornered, took it. His testimony would be the hammer that cracked Karen's carefully constructed facade. In court, Chandler laid it all bare. He described how Karen masterminded the land grab, promising him a slice of my property once the HOA annexed it. She dangled the prospect of a private pool on her new land, using HOA funds to bankroll the scheme. Chandler handled the dirty work, forging documents, cutting fences, stealing survey stakes, while Karen called the shots. The prosecutor played my Ring camera footage, time-stamped 12:47 a.m., showing Chandler and Karen loading rebar into her SUV, their faces clear under the moonlight. The jury watched in silence as the evidence piled up: stolen stakes from Karen's garage, spray paint cans, and bank records tracing HOA funds to her account. Karen's attorney, James Hall, tried to spin it, claiming Chandler acted alone and Karen was a victim of his deceit. But the jury wasn't buying it. After a tense deliberation, they delivered their verdict: guilty on all counts: felony conspiracy, theft, criminal mischief, and misdemeanor trespassing. Karen's bond was revoked, and she was led away in cuffs, her usual smirk replaced by a tight-lipped scowl. Chandler, already serving time, shuffled back to his cell, his head bowed. The sentencing hearing was a week later. Karen faced 18 months in prison, $32,000 in restitution to me for damages to my fence, beehive, and Pixel's vet bills, and $46,900 to the HOA for the stolen funds. A no-contact order barred her from me for 5 years post-release. The judge's gavel fell like a thunderclap, and I felt a weight lift. As Karen was escorted out, I caught her eye and gave a polite wave, not out of spite, but as a quiet declaration of closure. She looked away, defeated. Chandler's additional sentence was formalized: 4 years as agreed, with credit for time served. His testimony had been crucial, but it didn't erase his role. The HOA, meanwhile, began rebuilding trust, auditing their accounts, and electing a new board. They sent me a formal letter, apologizing for their oversight and thanking me for exposing the fraud. The $2,500 they'd already paid for repairs was just the start. They promised to pursue further recovery from Karen's assets. With the legal battles behind me, I turned to healing my land. The creek, once a battleground, sparkled again after I cleared the last of Karen's debris. I rebuilt the destroyed beehive, and the bees, resilient as ever, began producing honey by spring. Pixel, fully recovered, bounded through the grass, his golden fur catching the sun. I started a new project, a greenhouse where Karen had tried to claim my land. The frame went up quickly, and the smell of fresh soil and tomato seedlings filled the air. It was a symbol of reclaiming what was mine. One evening, as I watered the greenhouse, Nora Beltran stopped by. "You turned a war zone into a garden," she said, admiring the rows of seedlings. I laughed, but she was right. The land felt alive again, free of Karen's shadow. Elliot called later, confirming the restitution payments would start soon, though Karen's prison wages would trickle in slowly. It didn't matter, the principle was enough. As summer approached, I noticed new faces in the neighborhood drawn by the HOA's transparency. They waved as they walked by, and I waved back, feeling a sense of community I hadn't known before. The creek babbled softly, and Pixel napped in the shade of the greenhouse. The fight had been brutal, but it was over. I'd protected my home, my dog, and my peace. Standing in the greenhouse, surrounded by growth, I knew this was more than a victory. It was a new beginning. With Karen and Chandler behind bars and the legal storm settled, a quiet calm returned to my corner of the world. The HOA, chastened by their role in the scandal, underwent a transformation. A new board was elected, diverse, transparent, and eager to make amends. Their first act was a formal apology, delivered by mail with a $4,500 check from Chandler's frozen accounts to cover the full cost of my destroyed beehive, Pixel's vet bills, and fence repairs. The gesture wasn't just financial, it signaled a shift, a commitment to righting past wrongs. I deposited the check, feeling a flicker of optimism for the first time in months. The land, scarred by Karen's trespasses, became my focus. The creek, once choked with her concrete blocks and debris, now flowed freely, its banks lush with the native grasses I'd replanted. I decided to turn the contested strip of land, where Karen had dreamed of her illicit pool, into something vibrant. I broke ground on a greenhouse, a modest 12 by 20-foot structure with polycarbonate panels that caught the morning light. Inside, I planted tomato starts, basil, and peppers, their earthy scents mingling with the hum of possibility. The bees, undeterred by their earlier loss, thrived in their rebuilt hive, their soft buzz a soundtrack to my mornings. Pixel, his paw long-heeled, patrolled the property with a wagging tail, chasing butterflies and napping in the shade. The greenhouse wasn't just a project, it was a reclamation. Every nail I hammered, every seed I planted, erased a bit more of Karen's chaos. I'd catch myself smiling as I watered the seedlings, marveling at how life could sprout from such a bitter fight. The neighborhood noticed, too. New residents, drawn by the HOA's reformed reputation, stopped by to admire the greenhouse. "Heard you took down a real piece of work," one said, nodding toward Karen's old property. I shrugged, but their respect felt good. The HOA's changes rippled further. They hosted a community meeting, the first in years without Karen's domineering presence. I attended curious. The board outlined new bylaws, stricter financial oversight, regular audits, and a grievance process to prevent another land grab. They even proposed a community garden on a vacant lot, an idea I quietly endorsed. When they asked for volunteers, I offered to share my knowledge of pollinator-friendly plants, a nod to my bees. The room buzzed with enthusiasm, a stark contrast to the tension of the past. Pixel and I fell into a new rhythm. Our walks along the creek became longer, unmarred by trespassers or traps. I'd toss a stick for him, watching him bound through the grass, his joy infectious. One afternoon, Elliot, my lawyer, called with an update. Karen's restitution payments had begun, small deductions from her prison wages. "It's $58 a month," he said, chuckling. "You'll be 90 before it's paid off." I laughed too. The money was secondary to the principal. Chandler's accounts, meanwhile, were being liquidated to repay the HOA, ensuring they could fund their new initiatives. As spring turned to summer, the greenhouse flourished. Tomatoes ripened, their red skins warm from the sun. I shared the surplus with neighbors who reciprocated with homemade jam or fresh-baked bread. These small exchanges built bonds Karen's reign had stifled. One neighbor, a retiree named Clara, brought me a cutting from her heirloom rose bush. "For your greenhouse," she said. "I planted it near the entrance, a thorny reminder of resilience." The victory wasn't just in the land or the money, it was in the fresh start. The creek, the bees, Pixel's carefree romps, and the greenhouse stood as testaments to what I'd fought for. Karen's shadow no longer loomed. In its place grew community, growth, and peace. As I locked the greenhouse one evening, the sunset painting the sky in pinks and golds, I realized this wasn't just recovery, it was renewal. The fight had forged something stronger, and I was ready for whatever came next, with Pixel by my side and the land truly mine. A year after Karen's conviction, life had settled into a rhythm of quiet triumphs. The greenhouse thrived, its shelves heavy with tomatoes and herbs, while Pixel romped along the creek, free from nailboards or trespassers. The HOA's reforms held strong, and the neighborhood felt alive with new faces and trust. But Karen's legacy wasn't entirely gone. In early spring, a letter arrived from Elaine Castor, claiming to be Karen's heir. She insisted Karen had granted her a private right of way across my land, citing a deed that smelled of fresh ink and desperation. Elaine's claim was a transparent ploy to stir legal uncertainty, likely hoping I'd settle to avoid a fight. I called Elliot, my lawyer, who laughed at the audacity. "Let's bury this," he said. We pulled the original survey, Nora's meticulous records, and county documents proving the easement was public, not Karen's to give. Elliot filed a motion to dismiss, attaching the evidence. The deed Elaine provided was a clumsy forgery, wrong font, mismatched signatures, and a notary seal that didn't exist in state records. Faced with our response, Elaine withdrew her claim days before the court hearing, her lawyer citing clerical errors. I didn't celebrate, but the swift victory felt like slamming a door Karen had tried to pry open. Restitution checks began trickling in from the state's Crime Victim Fund, funded by Karen's prison wages, $58 a month, a symbolic drip that would take decades to cover the $32,000 she owed me. The HOA received similar payments toward their $46,900, drawn from Chandler's liquidated assets. The amounts were small, but the principle mattered. Each check was a reminder Karen's schemes had failed and justice, however slow, was grinding forward. Then came an unexpected twist. A letter arrived from Chandler, postmarked from the state penitentiary. He'd earned a paralegal certificate behind bars and wrote to apologize. I was greedy and Karen used that, he admitted, detailing how her promises of land and money had pulled him in. Enclosed was a hand-drawn map, suggesting spots for an orchard on my property. Apple and pear trees, he noted, would suit the soil. The gesture caught me off guard. Chandler wasn't absolved, his actions had cost me dearly, but the sincerity in his uneven handwriting gave me pause. I wrote back, keeping it brief. "Thanks for the map. Sunflowers are doing well." No promises, but a nod to his effort. The neighborhood continued to heal. The HOA's community garden, now blooming on a once vacant lot, drew volunteers who swapped stories over shovels and seedlings. I shared tips on pollinator plants, watching bees from my hive dance among the wildflowers. One afternoon, Clara, the neighbor with the rose cutting, invited me to a barbecue. Over burgers and lemonade, I heard how Karen's old tactics, bullying, gatekeeping, were fading from memory. "You changed things," Clara said. I shrugged, but her words lingered. The biggest surprise came in June. Sprout Tomorrow, the organic farming nonprofit that bought Karen's property, reached out. They were turning her lawn into a community garden and wanted my input on native pollinators. The irony was delicious. Karen's land, once a symbol of control, would nourish the community she'd antagonized. I agreed to consult, sketching plans for milkweed and coneflowers to attract butterflies and bees. Pixel, ever my shadow, sniffed curiously as I measured the plot. As summer unfolded, the garden took shape. I walked its rows, marveling at the transformation. Where Karen's fence posts had once stood, sunflowers now nodded in the breeze. The creek sparkled nearby, its banks secure. Pixel chased a grasshopper, and I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. Chandler's orchard idea nagged at me. Maybe I'd plant a tree or two, not for him, but for the land. The saga had come full circle. Karen's schemes, Elaine's gambit, and Chandler's betrayal were fading scars, overtaken by growth, literal and figurative. The restitution checks, the garden, even Chandler's letter were threads weaving closure. Standing by the creek, I tossed a stick for Pixel, watching him bound after it. This land, this peace, was mine, earned through grit and evidence. Whatever came next, I was ready, rooted in a community that had risen from Karen's ashes. A year after Karen's imprisonment, her former property became a canvas for redemption. Sprout Tomorrow, an organic farming nonprofit, had purchased her land and invited me to consult on a community garden, planting native pollinators to honor my bees. The irony was poetic. Karen's lawn, once a battleground for her control, would now feed and unite the neighborhood. I agreed, sketching beds of milkweed and sunflowers, envisioning a space where hostility turned to harmony. The first volunteer day was a revelation. I loaned my brush cutter to clear the overgrown lot, and a diverse crew showed up. New HOA members, families, even Deputy Rogers off-duty and wielding a shovel. We worked side by side, breaking soil, laying raised beds, and planting tomato vines. Laughter filled the air, mingling with the scent of fresh earth. Rogers, wiping sweat from his brow, grinned. "Never thought I'd see this place bloom," he said, nodding toward Karen's old house. I smiled, feeling the weight of the past lift. The garden wasn't just plants, it was a middle finger to Karen's legacy. Sprout Tomorrow's vision took root fast. By midsummer, the garden burst with color. Golden sunflowers, crimson tomatoes, and purple coneflowers buzzing with my bees. The HOA, now a model of transparency, supported the project, funding tools and seeds with audited dollars. Neighbors who'd once avoided each other swapped zucchini and stories, forging bonds Karen's reign had stifled. Pixel bounded through the garden, sniffing seedlings, his joy a reminder of what I'd fought for. The transformation was therapeutic. Where Karen's illegal fence posts had scarred the earth, rows of vegetables now thrived. The creek nearby flowed clear, its banks secure. One volunteer, a teenager named Mia, shyly thanked me for standing up to Karen. "It made us feel safe," she said. I brushed it off, but her words hit deep. This wasn't just my victory, it was the community. A letter from Chandler arrived, unexpected as ever. Still incarcerated, he'd earned a paralegal certificate and sent another apology, this time with a sketch of a community orchard. I didn't write back, but I tucked the idea away. Maybe one day an apple tree would grow here, not for him, but for the future. Karen's restitution checks continued, $58 a month, a slow drip of accountability. They'd never cover the full debt, but they symbolized her defeat. By fall, the garden was a triumph. Sprout Tomorrow hosted a potluck, tables laden with dishes from the harvest, roasted squash, fresh salads, honey-drizzled cornbread. Neighbors clapped for my role, but I waved it off. The real win was this: a place of division now nourished us all. As I walked home with Pixel, the sunset bathed the garden in gold. Karen's schemes had crumbled, replaced by roots and resilience. I paused by the creek, tossing a stick for Pixel. The land was mine, the community stronger, the future bright. Karen's old structure had been razed, its wood repurposed for garden trellises. Full circle, final victory. Closure didn't get sweeter than this. By October 2025, the scars of Karen's land grab had transformed into symbols of renewal. Sprout Tomorrow's community garden, thriving on her former property, hosted a harvest dinner that drew the neighborhood together. Tables groaned under dishes sourced from the garden. Roasted butternut squash, garlic honey carrots, and heirloom tomato bruschetta, their flavors vibrant with the land's redemption. Neighbors laughed and shared stories, a far cry from the tension Karen once sowed. When Sprout Tomorrow's director gave me a nod for my role in the saga, I shrugged. The real victory was this communal bounty, grown from hostility's ashes. The garden was more than produce, it was closure. Where Karen's illegal fence post once stood, sunflowers now swayed, their seeds feeding birds and my bees. The creek, cleared of her debris, sparkled under the autumn sun, its banks lush with native grasses. Pixel, my golden retriever, darted through the garden, chasing scents, his paw long healed from that cruel nailboard. Each step he took felt like a reclaiming of our peace, hard-won through cameras, surveys, and courtroom battles. I'd built a barn on my property, using reclaimed wood from Karen's dismantled structures, her old shed, her gate, her arrogance. The barn, fully permitted and sturdy, housed tools and dreams. Shelves for canning jars, space for a future orchard inspired by Chandler's letter. It stood as a quiet monument to everything endured and overcome. The HOA, now a model of accountability, had issued its final apology, their audits ensuring no repeat of Chandler's fraud. Restitution checks from Karen's prison wages, $58 a month, arrived like clockwork, a slow but steady reminder of her defeat. The neighborhood had changed, too. New families, drawn by the HOA's transparency, brought energy and warmth. Clara, the retiree who'd given me a rose cutting, hosted weekly coffee mornings, her porch a hub of chatter. The community garden fostered bonds, with kids like Mia learning to plant while their parents swapped recipes. Karen's name faded from conversation, replaced by plans for a winter market or a pollinator workshop I'd agreed to lead. Her no-contact order, extending years beyond her release, ensured she'd never darken this place again. One evening, as I locked the barn, the sunset painted the sky in fiery oranges. Pixel nudged my hand, ready for his walk. We followed the creek, its gentle babble a soundtrack to my thoughts. The fight had been brutal, sleepless nights, legal fees, Pixel's pain, but it forged something unbreakable. The land was mine, the community stronger, the future open. I tossed a stick for Pixel, watching him bound after it, his joy infectious. The greenhouse